grab a beer. We can continue the networking here in a minute, but it's about time for JAMStack Jev.
Boo! Boo!
Hey.
Hey! Hey! Come back on. Hey. Do I need to enter the password?
Yeah, why don't you?
Password is password.
Password
1, 2, 3, 5. So good luck guessing that.
Less than 3.
Let's make sure this is. Damn it.
All right, so thanks everyone for coming. I see some familiar faces, some new faces.
Oh, hello.
Thank you so much for coming to the JAMStack Denver meetup. We love doing this. It means a lot to see people show up again and again, as well as to have some new people. It's awesome. Our other co-organizer, Thomas, he's on the live stream right now. He's unwell, so he's joining us digitally. Additionally, our lightning speaker tonight was unwell as well, so Lita, she's not going to be here tonight. But we have some exciting content for you after our main presentation from Jev here. Let's give Jev a little thank you. Before we kick it off with Jev, there's some admin items, bathrooms over there. If you don't know where they are, ask the person next to you because they do. We usually have a little feedback poster, but for tonight we have a feedback notepad. So if you're hiring, if you're looking for jobs, if you have a Twitter handle, you can scribble your information there. We're going to post it on the meetup page for tonight's meetup. We like it when people do that. It's just a way to kind of remember those connections that you may have just made. Follow Martin's example. Martin, maybe you just pass that around the room since we've got a tight-knit crowd here. Yeah, feel free to ask questions, whatever you want. Interrupt Jev during this presentation that he's been pining over. We got some awesome sponsors: Frontier Airlines, pizza, Code Talent, venue, and drinks. We're really thankful that people.
Which one of those was the sponsor? Was the pizza, right?
Frontier is the pizza. Code Talent is the venue and the beer. I don't think Frontier can buy beer because we're regulated by the DOT. So there's no pot or beer at Frontier. Big surprise. But yes, thank you. This wouldn't be possible without a little bit of support from the community. Speaking of which, if anyone has a company that wants to get their name out, obviously we have a live stream, Twitch, YouTube. Dave here helps run the meetup. He's awesome. We've got some past speakers in the house. Cody, what's up? Future speakers in the house. Jev, what's up? Let's see, we're on Twitter at JAMStack Denver. Code of conduct, really important. We're a very inclusive community here. I would think the rules are obvious, but if you are unclear, go check out our meetup page. You can find out all about our code of conduct. Just don't be an asshole and you'll be fine. Pretty simple, but worth mentioning. If anyone y'all want to speak at a future meetup, we will be taking January off because the first Wednesday of January is the first of the year. And I know I myself will not be Very excited about going to a meetup that day. So we might do a happy hour that week or something. We're still brainstorming, but stay tuned for December. We've got some exciting content. The JAMStack. Okay, so the JAMStack is an acronym that stands for JavaScript, APIs, and Markup. So if you're familiar with React or Vue or Angular, those front-end frameworks and the way in which you use them kind of emulates the principles of the JAMStack. JAMStack's cool because it's kind of agnostic to the specific technologies that you use. So when you employ a front-end application that is a modern JavaScript library that communicates all of its dynamic data via an API and serves up your content via pre-rendered static markup, you're able to increase performance, reduce security risks, and provide a really awesome experience for your end user. A lot of this can be done in conjunction with serverless computing, so you can kind of abstract your backend all the way out to the point where you don't have to manage the server anymore. We can get deeper into the specifics of the JAMStack during this happy hour session that seems to go on for many, many minutes after the presentations. We'd love to just jam out. I personally like the Bob Marley jamming music video and all the jam. I don't know if that was appropriate,
But it happens. So.
but it happens. I've got a playlist of songs that just about jam in that mansion. So next time we get the speakers going, we'll play that for us. So I think we're good in terms of admin items. Thanks for listening to me for a few minutes longer than I meant to speak for. Our main presentation tonight is going to be by Jev Forsberg. He's has an interesting past as a civic advocate, a pastor, and now a coder. So someone who is a community builder and a great communicator, and really excited to tell us about how you can manage state in React with hooks. That's the hot new thing right now. So let's give Jev some love. I'll let you take it away.
Awesome. All right. Hello. Okay if I sit here?
Yeah.
Like Nate? Cool guy? Just in the way, sorry. So as this says, my name is Jev Forsberg. I love technology, I always have. I can remember when I was small, I always wanted a PC in the house, but we didn't have enough money to buy one. So I would take old cardboard boxes and I would like cut out a screen, and I would like take that same cardboard and I would make a keyboard with it and color in the ABCs, and of course up in the upper left it would start like A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H. That's not actually how it went, but that's how it went in my brain, and I would like play Frogger and do all sorts of fun things on it. But in my previous life, I was a pastor for about 8 years and also an atheist, which is a long, tumultuous, exciting, funny, weird story that we can talk about later. But I loved almost all of it. I loved the public speaking, I loved the one-on-one mentorship, I loved the educational portion, I loved the team leadership, I loved the civic advocacy. The only part I did not like is kind of the politics of it. And I have found in my experience, the only thing that's more political than politics is religion. And I decided it was time for a change. My wife, let's see if this works. Boop, nope, boop, nope, click, yep. This is my wife and son. My wife and I and our dog. There's our, you can't see that super well, but he's a 5-year-old chocolate lab. And we moved to Denver about 1.5 years ago after my career switch. Oh yeah, perfect, thank you. After my career switch, and when I was trying to figure out how to pivot, I was talking to a friend of mine at Waymo. Who's heard of Waymo? Yes.
Yes.
Waymo is the self-driving car who's under the Google Alphabet umbrella, folks. I have a friend there who's been there for about 2.5 years. And we were just talking about life and his career and my career. And I remember him telling me, because he has a sister with MS, and I remember he was telling me, he's like, I love getting up every day, going to work, and working on technology that I know is going to bring mobility and goodness and life and joy to my sister's world. And I remember thinking to myself, while the language of religious expression is certainly universal, it seems like technology is becoming another universal language that if I can become fluent in, I can do that same kind of work for my community and my world to make things greener and better and bring utility and goodness to people's lives. So that's how I found Turing. I actually went to Turing. I graduated about 6 weeks ago, and I am hip deep. Thank you. Did you go to Turing? Oh, okay. I like your enthusiasm. And I'm hip deep, neck deep, eyeball deep, head deep in the job search. So if anyone knows of any positions that you think would be good for a front end or full stack junior developer, I would love the opportunity to talk to you. And I'll take questions like Nate's anytime, honestly, just interrupt me. I won't take it personally. I've had many insults thrown at me over the years, and interrupting for a good question is never one of the problems. So, who's developed in React before? Raise your hand. Bada bing. I'm probably not going to tell you too much new information. But in 2017, when the React team began development on hooks, so before hooks was created, React was the most liked, most used, and fastest growing front-end framework that existed at the time. So you kind of have to ask yourself, why was the React team developing something that they seemingly didn't need to do? They were the most popular, everybody liked them, they were smoking hot. Why develop hooks? So I think a little historical context on React can help us understand why hooks were such a logical and necessary development. So our first date is May 29th, 2013. Do you guys know what day this was, by any chance? This was when React was released at JSConf. Interestingly, it looked pretty much the same as it does now, 6.5 years later. It has state, it had props, component composition, JSX, so on and so forth. The only thing that changed really to the core were the APIs and how they worked. So in this beginning version, we had something called create class, and that was the first way that we were able to create React components. JavaScript in 2013, was anyone developing in JavaScript here in 2013? Raise your hand. God, I was not. I literally have been developing for like 9 months. In 2013, it did not have a class system. Not really, and it still kind of doesn't, but we can talk about that later. So this is React's workaround, this create class. Now, of course, all of us that use ES6 now, which I hope, is anyone still programming in ES5? It's okay if you are, there's no shame. Okay, just checking. All of this changed with ES6, which brings us to our next date, which was the release of ECMAScript 6, January 17th, 2015. Now this gave us a way to natively build classes in the JavaScript language, so that's kind of what you're going to see here. Now this put the React team in a tough spot, because they had a choice to make. They had a very important decision that they had to figure out. They could either fight the progression of the ECMAScript momentum, and by the way, this is me, this is how I fight. They could try to fight the progression of the ECMAScript progression, or they could move forward with the flow of the ECMAScript tide. And as we know, since ES6 and React still exist, they chose the latter, which brings us to our next date, which is, I think, 10 days later. January 27th, 2015. This is when version 13 beta 1 came out. And this version of React gave us the ability to use native JS classes to finally create components. We didn't have to use create class methods anymore. From the release notes of this beta version, I found this quote. JavaScript originally didn't have a built-in class system. Every popular framework built their own, and so did we. This means that you have to learn slightly different semantics for each framework. We figured that we're not in the business of designing a class system. We just want to use whatever is the idiomatic JavaScript way of creating classes. And so that's what they did. So here we have, can everybody read this okay, this component? So this is the way of building components that we basically now all recognize. There's no more create class method. There's no more get initial state method. Instead, we build our components with our ES6 syntactic sugar, and we initialize our state in our constructor. But of course, with all good things, there are plenty of trade-offs as well. Because according to the ECMAScript spec, if you are extending a subclass, which in this case is going to be the React.component, you must first invoke the super method before you can use the this keyword, okay? And specifically when you're using React, you need to remember to also pass props to your super invocation. None of which is problematic per se, but a lot of developers were finding this super annoying and kind of forgetting to do it and getting problems that way. Secondly, auto-binding. Create class method auto-bound the this keyword to the component instance. This is not true for React.component. You would have to bind this manually in the constructor, like this, right? So raise your hand if you understand this. Liars! No, I'm just kidding. It's very confusing, right, though? Like, not all languages have this thing, and it confuses a lot of people. When I learned it, well, when I started to learn about it, I'm still learning about it. It seemed needlessly confusing. Regardless, it exists. So, pretty quickly, devs found out that they didn't know how the this keyword worked. And if you didn't remember to bind the method in the constructor, like you're seeing here, you'd be greeted with the error that we all love and have seen, which is the unhandled rejection type error. Cannot read property set state of undefined. And why is the set state property undefined? Because you didn't bind this. You forgot to bind the this, right? So fortunately, soon after, class fields were introduced. Class fields allowed you to add instance properties directly as a property on a class without having to use the constructor. No longer did you need to use a constructor to set the original state of the component either, which is fantastic. And thirdly, there was no need to bind this in the constructor since we can use arrow functions for our methods. So arrow functions. When does this bind in an arrow function? What's that?
You say when does it?
When does this get bound in an arrow function? What's that?
Get bound at the root level. They're invoking wherever you're.
Yep, the invocation. Or I'm sorry, the declaration it gets bound in ES6, right? But in ES5, it gets bound at invocation, right? So you don't have to bind things in the constructor because when you write the method, if you use an arrow function, it can bind it in there. So, fantastic. Yay, everything works. We're all happy. We can all give high fives. We can all hug. We can all write code well. The problem is that is not quite where we are just yet. So the whole idea of React is that we can modularly break down our application into smaller, manageable pieces that we can then compose together, right? That's the whole shtick. This component model is what makes React fast, elegant, and pretty easy to learn for the most part, right? It's what makes React React. The component model is great, but the React team at the time knew that the implementation of the component model still left something to be desired. Specifically, the way in which lifecycle methods were handled. Lifecycle methods forced us to do one important but unfortunate thing. A React component's logic has always been coupled with its lifecycle, right? But sprinkling related logic all throughout the component didn't actually make sense for what the React team was trying to build in the first place. Also, it often made sharing logic with other components very, very difficult, which brings us to our next date. That is February 11th, 2015. Sebastian Marc Baget's gift. Anybody know how to say that last name? I definitely don't.
I would guess it's closer to
Marc
Mark Boga.
Boga? Okay, I'd buy that. I'll buy it. Sebastian Marc Boga's gist, which is actually this right here. And he basically said, what if we have a function, and what if that function took in a component as an argument? And then what if it returned another class component that contained all the logic and all the state that we wanted to share across those components? And according to Tyler McGinnis, the React community was like, okay, that sounds fine. That works fine. So February 11th, this idea is what introduced for the first time higher order components. So here we have a higher order component called with subscription. And what we do here is we put all of the states and the logic that we want to share over multiple components inside. And it takes two arguments. First one is a component, and the second one is the state that we want to share over all these components. Then what it renders is the original component with the state and the original props as props. So if any components on our app also needed the subscription data, we could just pass those components in as arguments as well. Perfect. Again, the difficulty here is that higher order components have issues as well. There's always trade-offs. First of all, the whole idea is fairly convoluted, right? Like, I have an idea. Let's make a component that takes other components, then renders them and returns them as class components, and then we can now use those components. Like, it doesn't make a lot of sense, and it makes everyone's life really difficult, right? Second of all, what if you have more than one higher order component, right? You're going to get multiple layers of components on components on components, which is called wrapper hell. And here's a great example of wrapper hell, and I'm sure all of us have experienced this a little bit. Higher order components, you have to keep wrapping things more and more and more and more, outward, 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 and then you finally have this, which is convoluted, it's confusing, it's difficult to read, it's just not great. So at this point in our scenario, where are we? Well, we now, at this point, are using ES6 classes for stateful React components because that's just what made sense for us at the time. You have to call super and pass props, which again is kind of annoying, but totally fine. This binding is confusing and can be confusing. And organizing our components by lifecycle methods forces us to sprinkle related logic throughout our component and not have it in one condensed place, which is problematic. So the React team needed to solve all of these issues while still remaining simple, composable, flexible, and extendable. And that's the impressive thing about hooks, is because hooks attempts to basically solve all the problems on the left while still remaining all the things on the right. So John Carmack, who's the CTO of Oculus, I actually got to meet him. He went to the church that I was a pastor at for a few months. He had me and some of the other young people over to Oculus in Seattle, and we got to play a bunch of new fun games and mess around with the Oculus, which was awesome. There's a great quote that I found from John, that relates to hooks. Sometimes the elegant implementation is just a function, not a method, not a class, not a framework, just a function. So now we can finally say with tiers, no more React.components. But we can also say hello to all functional components with hooks. So with that one move that we have moving to hooks, we solve heavy classes, which we no longer have. We don't have to call super and pass props. We no longer have the this issue cropping up. So we can celebrate, like Carlton. But with that one move, we also break some stuff. One, adding state to components is still problematic. And two, how do we deal with lifecycle methods, right? So Fortunately, this is actually my favorite GIF of all time. That's so smart. I lived in China and India for a number of years, and stuff like this makes me feel so dumb because I would not be able to like figure it out. But this guy's like, yeah, I'll just try this thing on my back. So we break a couple things too, but Hooks has a solution for us. The first one is UseState. If you guys have ever used React hooks, you probably know this one. This is one of the most common React hooks. So UseState takes in a single argument, which is the initial value of the state itself. And then what it returns is an array with the first index being the state itself that you passed in, and the second index being a function to update that state. You're usually going to see this typed this way with array destructuring. But here we have loading, which is going to be the state. We have set loading, which is to update the state. We pass in true. Loading is now true, and we have the set loading function that we can change true to false or false to true. So this is great. This takes care of our first broken issue, adding state to a functional component. Our second one is called UseEffect. UseEffect lets us perform side effects inside of our functional components that run by default after every completed render. It takes two arguments. The first one is a function, and the second one is an optional array. The function defines what the side effect does. So in this case, what does this do? I know you guys know.
Updates the page every time username changes.
Updates the page. Anytime the username changes, updates the page. And the optional array defines when the effect is going to run. Right? So when is it going to update? Anytime the username changes. Which is actually really cool because if you pass in an empty array, what do you think happens?
It runs once.
It runs the first time just like component did mount. Because it's not going to change, right? Unless you push something into there, which you would. So with just these two hooks, we now have a very viable state management and lifecycle effect method manager, which is fantastic. So at this point, we have gotten rid of heavy classes. See you later. Calling super and passing props, fantastic. Again, we don't have to worry about the this issue. And now we have dealt with lifecycle methods also. Another time for celebration because I love hooks. But we still have one issue to work out. And that issue is sharing state. Sharing is caring. So, as we learned, hook state works exactly like class component states. Every instance of the component has its own state. So to work a solution which shares state between components, what we do is create a custom hook. And this is where things get really cool and a little bit confusing. But this is the idea right here. We want to create an array of listeners and only one state object. Every time that one component changes the state, all subscribed components get their set state functions fired and get updated. We can do that by calling UseState inside our custom hook, but instead of returning the set state function, instead we add it to an array of listeners and return a function which updates the state object and runs all listeners' functions. Sounds confusing. Let's take a deeper look. So this is our function right here. We're going to import UseState and UseEffect, which are two hooks from React. We're going to set up an empty array. This is going to be our listeners. We're going to define a state, and we're going to set counter to 0. The only thing we have is a counter right now. Then we have our use custom hook, which we're going to then default that we can import other places. You're going to make a new listener, and you're going to set it to use state at index 2. I mean this second index, which is going to be how we update our state. And then we're going to have a UseEffect, which takes our listeners array, pushes in our new listener, and it's going to run just one time with that empty array on component did mount, basically. And then it's going to return that state, and it's going to return set state. And then set state above that is going to take the new state. It's going to reassign state on line 27 to the spread old state plus added on the spread new state. Then for all our listeners in our array that we added in the use custom hook, for each of those listeners, we're going to pass in the new state to those listeners. So let's see what that looks like in an actual component. So we're bringing in React, we're bringing in our custom hook, which you just saw. We have our counter right there. We're going to destructure our custom hook. We're going to have our global state, which we saw in the previous, which is just right here on line 27. It's our global state and our set global state, which is going to update our global state. We're getting that from our use custom hook. Every time someone clicks on our little button right here, add one global is going to fire. That's going to make a new counter value equal to the old global state dot counter plus 1. And we're just going to take the set global state from position 1 right there, and we're going to change the counter in that state to the new state. And if we do it this way, everything across the board can share. We don't have to wrap anything. Everybody can have the same info. Then with UseReducer hook, which is an alternative to set state, we can go even further by using reducers and actions natively. It accepts a reducer of type and returns the current state, right there, paired with a dispatch method. And if you're familiar with Redux, which I'm sure most of you guys are, you probably already know how this works. So UseReducer is usually preferable to set state when you have complex state logic and that involves multiple sub-values or when the next state depends on the previous one. UseReducer also lets you optimize performance for components that trigger deep updates because you can pass dispatch down instead of callbacks. So now this is really time to celebrate because we basically have everything we need. We no longer need context. We don't need higher order elements or anything else for state management. So goodbye Redux, long live hooks. We don't need you ever again. Ironically, that is actually not my conclusion. I love Redux, and I think Redux will be here forever, and I hope it is. Because actually, in my view, there's not as much overlap between hooks and Redux as you might think there would be. So let's take a little bit of a deeper look. Hooks don't give us new magical state capabilities, and I think that's what they were kind of built up to be. Like, oh my gosh, hooks are amazing. They do so much stuff that we couldn't do before. That's not really true. Instead, hooks just enhances the API for things that we could already do with React in the first place. The hooks API has made the native React state API a lot more usable, and because it's easier than the class model it replaces, one can use hooks state more robustly and more often. However, just because the UseReducer React hook provides a Redux-like means of managing state transitions, it nevertheless does not replace Redux when it comes to managing a global application state tree. Instead of declaring a bunch of UseState hooks, which would be a pain in the ass, Redux is still super useful at a lower level in the component hierarchy for handling pieces of state that are dependent on one another. But again, in the end, hooks simply doesn't replace Redux, at least not currently. Let's take a quick look at what Redux is actually built to do and designed to do. Number one, deterministic state resolution. Isolation of state management, a complete separation of state management from your components. To be the single source of truth for application state. To easily share state between different components. And time travel debugging with the dev tools. If you guys have ever used React, you can see that it chronicles and remembers every action that's fired, all the reducers that are going. You can do so much amazing time travel debugging. You can just go back and be like, what happened? Oh, here's the problem. I know exactly what it was. In other words, Redux gives us code organization and debugging superpowers. It makes it easier to build more maintainable code and much easier to track down the root cause when something goes wrong. Hooks, on the other hand, use state and replicate a component's lifecycle without using a class, co-locate related logic in one place in your component rather than splitting it between various lifecycle methods, which is great, and share reusable behaviors independent of component implementations. So note that these fantastic benefits don't really overlap with the benefits of Redux. You can and should use React hooks to get deterministic state updates, but that's always been a feature of React in the first place. And Redux's deterministic state model just happens to plug into it nicely. So, Hooks does not kill Redux. In fact, it complements it beautifully. So, what is the TLDR that I basically want to get to? It's a couple of things. One, hooks are awesome. You should use hooks. They streamline React, they lighten its weight, they increase the already used functionality of everything you could already do. Two, Redux is awesome. You should use Redux. It's language agnostic, which is fantastic. It does what it was designed to do beautifully, and it integrates wonderfully with React. Three, with the tools like React Redux Hooks API and React's UseReducer hook, there's no need to choose one over the other. And four, the moral of the story here is that hooks are awesome, Redux is awesome. Use one, use both, mix and match. Do whatever you want to do. Code the way that makes the most sense to the needs that you have. And finally, the most important part of this talk is the thing that my wife always tells me when I come home and find her on the couch drinking, is that you're not drinking alone if the dog is at home with you. So none of us are alcoholics. Knock on wood. Here's my contact info. If you guys have any questions, I can answer those now. I don't really know what you guys do next, or if you want to do Q&A if you have any, or if you want to move to the next thing. Oh yeah. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Jev. It was awesome.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
Someone as eloquent as yourself and so knowledgeable about React hooks. I know I was doing some job stuff and someone was like, tell me about React hooks. And I was like, Jev, give me a presentation.
They're great. Just say they're great.
So we like to do a little Q&A. I'll kick it off. Which question though? I wrote down a couple.
Oh, did you?
I suppose in the curriculum at Turing, I'm familiar, you build a number of SPAs, single page applications. Many of these are in group projects, and so could you provide a use case in a way that maybe you would refactor one of your applications? Like, is there a good use case that you see for hooks, something you'd want to go back and rework?
Yeah, Nate, that's a great question. So, we have a couple Turing grads here. One.
I think it's just
you and me.
It's me and you.
Oh my gosh.
We have a lot.
Oh my gosh. So, Turing is a little behind the curve, sadly, currently. To them, hooks is too new of a technology for them to put in their curriculum, actually.
Sure.
Yeah, I know. It's weird. I think they just don't want to rewrite the...
Here I was like all impressed at Turing.
Yeah, no, I had to learn this on my own.
We're not talking bad on Turing.
Yeah, no, Turing is fantastic, and I loved my time there. They just, I think they want to make sure that hooks is really solidly founded before they move into teaching it thoroughly. But all of our state management was in classes. Yeah, 6 classes. You could go back to literally any project I made, even finally through the end in my mobile applications, and all of them would have been written in ES6 classes. And you could literally just go back and rewrite everything and just like slim down, and everything would be faster and lighter weight. But pretty much any single page application is going to perform great no matter what, unless you do crazy video maybe things or weird rendering things with classes. But there is something just really elegant about moving away from classes in the first place. Because most of you guys are familiar with JavaScript. So we know that classes are not actually classes, right? They're just like syntactic sugar bullshit because we saw it happening in C# and we're jealous of it and we wanted to basically build it in. In reality, it's still just like prototypal inheritance, and that's kind of what it is. But there's something really satisfying about not having to use the class structure for a React app. It just looks cleaner, it's less lines of code, and it's faster. And it's hard to describe why I like it, but any use case is a good use case. Any case is a good use case.
I mean, you're also not cramming in a paradigm that the language wasn't designed for.
Exactly. Yeah. I think that's maybe it more than anything, is like you see it and you're like, I know what you're trying to do. I know where you're from. This doesn't feel right, but I guess I'll do it because I don't have a choice. And it just seems like with hooks, you can get back to maybe a more pure JavaScript experience even.
Makes sense.
I got a question. So how long did it take you to grasp what hooks were doing and actually learn it?
That's another great question. So I won't lie to you. I put this presentation together in about the past 4 or 5 days. It took about that long, but it's cool because like the React team is very good about understanding what is good about React and just mimicking it in other ways. So I would say if you're familiar with the React class system, picking up, if you do one project in hooks, one silly portfolio page, like put your photo on a page and just use hooks, you will understand it within 2 hours. Just because I think the team at Facebook did such a good job of taking what we already knew and just making it, giving it a different form, but making it easy enough to understand because it was close to the old form, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So I would say, yeah, a couple hours, like a week of goofing around with it, and you'll pick it up.
Tell me, question. Why is putting a hook inside of a condition a bad thing?
Is it a bad thing?
It is. It's because of the way the React.
I've never had to.
I know. It'll yell at you in the console.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it'll be like you cannot. Basically, it watches to see if in different renders of the function there's a different layer of hooks. And the reason why is when you think about how hooks work, how do they know? How do they know which hook is being called?
Right.
You don't tell it.
Right.
It doesn't have introspection of variables. It does it by sequence. So hook 0, hook 1, hook 2. The problem is if you have a condition is your state from hook 2 will end up in hook 1 accidentally. So basically because render functions are non-asynchronous, it's guaranteed that at the beginning and at the end of that render, it will always be in one loop. So they basically set the state at the top of the render, unset it at the end, and then the number of calls of useHook inside is how it knows which state to look at. So if you put in an if condition, you might end up with the wrong state.
So how do you deal with wanting to conditionally like change things with hooks?
You have to use your conditions outside of hooks, layered components, or so you use a context state to aggregate stuff, or things like that. But
Interesting.
hooks cannot be used inside of conditions.
You can't like set up a hook and then not use it. Like you can put a call to set whatever inside a condition. You just can't put the use whatever inside of a condition.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
That makes sense. That's a great way to deal with it, probably. Huh. Cool.
Is there like a tutorial?
You know, you would think
so
there would. You think there are a million of them, and they're all.
Well, I mean, like, did they rewrite getting started with React? Right? Like,
They're definitely
That is the biggest problem for
Yeah.
our juniors. Like they're so hard. It's so hard for them to go and like rock these because all the tutorials are for like legacy, like a mix of like classes
Right.
or like you have to, I told them like look at the date. If it's published in the last like 3 months, read it. If not, go find it.
Yeah, it's old.
Like React has moved too fast conceptually for like legacy tutorials to really be valuable.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's true of any JavaScript framework too. I mean,
It's true of technology in
Angular's
general.
crazy right now. I had an Angular job
Angular's
February
not like
last
version
year
8.
or February this year. There's like we're 3 versions ahead of what I was using in January. Like they weren't released, but you know the company couldn't keep up already, and then there's like all these versions, and now ID's a thing. And I'm just like,
Something I
ID's like a Java build tool. Oh no, so there's like a artifact tool. It's a new like Angular like core component that handles some tree shaking situations and stuff like that. And it's they're all talking about. I don't know exactly what it does. I just saw it the other day and I was like, God damn it, now I have to take all this stuff. Yeah, I'm like, oh man, I gotta read stuff.
I would say, what I will say for React is the docs are phenomenal. If you've ever just been on their docs page, they are nails. Like they talk to you, not like you're stupid, but that you're like 6 years old, which is great. Like I love that. Like I will accept. I will accept that any day. And they do a great job of like moving through all the kind of the 5 or 6 core hooks and relating it to how it used to work. So most of how I learned this was just like going through docs and just getting on a JavaScript page and messing around with it. But yeah, the docs are awesome. I would say though, if it's more than 3 months old, it's almost useless, which is crazy.
That's kind of bad.
It is what it is. Yeah.
One of the things it does, though, at least in React, is it levels the playing field between senior engineers and junior engineers a little bit. In general, in technology, you're seeing this a lot more. Like senior engineer means a lot less because the thing you're senior in is outdated in like 3 minutes. So like everybody who knows C++, like that hasn't changed in forever. But if you're like coding like React or Angular or pretty much any frontline language, like everybody's a junior developer. You're like tomorrow is something new.
Yeah.
That's definitely a good point. Just like people are always, they look for experience, but you want someone that's like senior in problem solving and learning things.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Like, you know,
I'm awesome at learning new things.
Yeah, like how
10
many
years of experience.
Okay, you worked here for 10 years. What have you learned in 10 years?
Yeah, right.
If you have a list, then okay, you're senior.
PhD.
You actually see this happening a lot now. Is tech companies are screening for learning capacity, and there's actually like full on like screening sets of like questions and things you can do with candidates to see like how well they learn versus what they know, because how quickly you go and learn new things is much more relevant to the business than what you know and what your experience is.
Yeah.
So this is a great segue into our next topic. Let's give Jev another round of applause. I really appreciate seeing all of you here. It means a lot to see people come back, to see a couple new people show up. You know, that's what makes this community special, is we're able to have these conversations. And so one of the pieces of feedback we've gotten on our little feedback form back there is topics people want to talk about. And one of those topics is the interview and hiring process, hence the great segue there. And I believe we're all in different phases of our career. Some of us are more senior, some of us are just getting started. So if you've never been to the JAMStack meetup before, we're gonna hang out, we'll plug in my iPhone, we'll listen to some music and drink some beers, and like, so we can continue these conversations. So I'm gonna cap it at my favorite number, 12. I was born on the 12th, it's also very divisible, 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, very divisible number. Anyways, let's just talk about like the interview process and getting hired a little bit. So I wrote down a bunch of concepts that I think are important. We can talk about what you're thinking is important. We'll talk about it later over drinks. So the one thing that I have found really important is when you get the technical assessment, right? You have to go build a little React app, or you got to solve something using vanilla JavaScript. I've found a lot of success in providing like just a markdown document explaining my thought process. Like every time I've just said, oh well, I saw this problem, I thought that I would solve it in this order, and then, you know, kind of like is a fleshed out Git history being like, okay, I tried to solve it this way, that didn't work because Redux is too heavy, maybe I use hooks, and explain, you know, your knowledge of why you did that. I think you can provide a lot of insight into your thinking, even if a company doesn't ask for it. You can provide it, and that exemplifies your communication skills. You're able to practice your writing skills. Companies care maybe more about that than they do your technical skills in differing degrees. I don't know, does anyone else have any extrapolation on that piece
Yeah,
specifically?
but the way I like to describe it to people is code is very much like art. If you watch an artist like paint a picture, they don't start at the top left corner and paint it perfectly all the way through.
Sure.
And a lot of times, if especially in a live coding interview, what I notice like when it goes poorly is people try to do that. What you see is someone create the outline, explain what they're doing, and then start filling it out, right? So they're going to start shading it, they're going to start adding it in, and you get eventually to the finished piece. But you don't try and get it all on the page at once. So that concept of like outlining what you're doing, explaining your thoughts. Usually when I'm interviewing a candidate, the first thing I want them to do is like, don't code. Just like walk me through what you're about to do. And then let's dig in. Then write comments of where you're going to code, and then dig in. And it's so helpful for the interviewer to understand, because remember, the interviewer is trying to figure out, do you know? That's like, don't care about like whether you get flustered or any of these things, right? Their job there is to evaluate, do you know your shit? And if you do, you're through to the next round. And if not, then like sometimes you'll get caught up trying to paint the whole picture, get halfway through, and the interviewer is just unsure, like, how much does he know? How much doesn't he know? I see you got the first half, but I don't understand the logic. So just to double down, that's definitely right. Like creating that outline, and just really walking the interviewer through and helping them understand that you do know.
Awesome,
Yeah.
thank you for your insight.
Yeah, one piece of advice I'd probably give is go with the simplest. If you're trying to like come up with a solution for like a problem they present to you, just use whatever the first solution you can think of. Don't try to make the most ideal solution, because I've definitely tripped myself up before where it's like, oh, I could just do like a simple for loop here, but I could also try to make it a one-line fancy
Reduce function,
yeah.
no other iterations.
Which and then you just
And
run
zero.
into problems and it looks like you're just overcomplicating things. So yeah.
I also think that a lot of that comes from being a pragmatic programmer, right? Like a lot of problems just in general in development, whether it be, the 3-day rabbit hole that's unnecessary that you went down to figure out some problem that didn't actually need a solution. That to, premature optimizations that don't actually do anything and actually are counterproductive to what your end goal was because you didn't go against metrics or anything. It's always just kind of like relating back to literally, instead of asking your question, like, how do I do this? It's, why the hell am I doing this? And if you can answer that question, you should continue kind of deal. And going through every step and trying to keep things as simple as possible and always explaining every step that you're doing and outlining and always answering, well, I'm doing this because of this, just keeps you more grounded when you're writing code. Because when you get into, and it's fine to go into a personal project and that's the goal of it. Like, this is my exploratory freeform Jazz Odyssey in JavaScript, like that's fine. But like, you have to know that you're doing that, and you can't do that when someone's paying you.
Awesome, thank you for your input. What about the hiring or interview process?
I have a question about the whole check screen thing.
Sure.
Which I typically hate.
Me too.
Um,
It's unfair sometimes.
Well, because it does feel like, it feels contrived. But in my real life, and every time I walk out of the text screen, I'll find that if I sit at my desk and I keep trying to solve the problem for an hour, I'll get nowhere. And if I stand up and I walk out of the building, it's like, yeah, totally, got it now. Has anyone seen anybody say like, yeah, I'm in my tech interview, I'm gonna just walk out of the room for a second and I'll be back.
There's a lot of
Never seen
debate
that
whether or
before,
not
yeah.
text screens are in any way actually valuable. There's argument that they actually give you the wrong signal to the wrong people. You'll be hired, right? You'll be hired people that are perfectly smart, people that are right for the team, that learn well. So there's a lot of debate around whether or not text screens are actually the right way to go about it. I think they're essential. I usually see text screens as more of an opportunity to have a conversation with an engineer. And you'll see different companies do it poorly, and you'll have this experience where it's like a lot of gotchas in there.
Yeah.
It's like, let's see
Overcomplicated
how
questions.
senior you are. Can you visualize all the gotchas up front? But like, that's not the engineers we actually want to hire, because we're just hiring people that know what to do. And guess what? 5 minutes into your job, you're going to learn stuff you don't know how to do. So let's figure out.
Yeah.
So my tech screens deliberately create questions that even senior engineers will not know. So I'm filtering for is what do you do when you don't know?
Yeah.
That's the question that
think
you want
it's
to
a good
answer. Like,
point.
what do you do? So like, you'll see people run into that and get flustered, like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna fail this tech screen because like I obviously am not as senior as I thought, man. Like, and I'm like, no, this is like it's literally there because I didn't know the first time I went through it. I've been doing it for 20 years. So like, and so like that's the my advice for tech screens is ask questions, talk about it. Like nobody's here expecting a live performance of anything. It's you run into a question, you're like, I don't get it. Like you might stop and get flustered, but like stop and ask a question, be like, what is this? If you might be like ask a few leading questions to like push you in the right direction, or they might be think about it for a second. So you might stop and like they'll guide you, but like that conversation shows that you're recognizing that you don't know something, and then how you respond to that is going to create a lot of signal for the person.
Yeah, I mean, my experience as well has been a lot of the tech screens, especially if like it's with multiple people of the team, it's to see like, are you going to work well with these other people, or like, is it an environment that you would want to work in too? So kind of an evaluation on both sides, as well as, testing your thinking and problem solving skills.
Yeah, and it makes sense too, because you put yourself in that position, like, are you going to work with the person that's going to be like, all right, this is exactly what the problem is, and this is the way to fix it, and this is the right way to do it, and if you don't agree that that's the right way to do it, I'm upset at you. And like, you don't want to work with that guy. If, like, you're like,
They could be the smartest person in the room.
Instantly start collaborating with you and like trying to bounce ideas off you. You're like, I can work with you. Like, we can solve some stuff together.
Yeah.
How many of y'all have ever done pairing?
Yeah.
This is not my pairing.
I did pairing 3 hours ago.
Alright. That's essentially what most tech screens are. It's an opportunity to pair with someone you're likely to be working with for the next whatever.
Yeah.
And yes, there's a contrived circumstance you're trying to solve for, and sometimes they're really poorly done, and you're a victim of that situation. But like, ideally, a good one is just.
It's kind of strange because I've done pairing professionally. I did extreme programming, so back in 2000. Back in 2001, 2002, when we were doing extreme programming, we were sitting in a bullpen pair.
Oh, yes.
And like,
There's a couple of companies that still do that. I know there's one company that does mandatory pairing 100% of the time. You can't cut it.
That's
Wow.
very
That's
interesting.
intense.
oh, I think Pivotal might be like that. I don't know, the DJ, the Java user group.
It's like that's where all the extroverted coders go. It's the most successful place for extroverted
Well,
coders.
it's interesting because like the more senior person should actually not be touching the keyboard, and that's what I think people kind of get backwards. But I had a group of, there were 5 people who were all network engineers and were fantastic, but we had to do a Java project, and I ended up being able to teach them Java and actually finish the project and save the $7 million like in 6 months by sitting in a bullpen pair program. So I would like give Java lectures, and we all like I would make sure people got started, and then I could float the room and make sure that nobody got stuck for a long time.
Yep.
And that kind of pairing, it worked out great. And it is automatic code review, which
In relation to interview, the pairing is usually not meant to be mentory though. Pairing is
the
like
problem with the interview is they set you this problem and then they give you a time limit.
yeah.
And it's like,
I'm totally with you. I need to go outside and look at a tree and the leaves falling off a tree to be like, oh, I should use this way to solve this. Like, I need like a break from the screen to kind of process some of these deeper problems.
It's almost like trying to take yourself out of the fact that you're in like a high stress environment. Like one thing I've noticed is like when I'm trying to, like if I get stuck on a problem, even at work, I just pull out either like a notepad or like we'll go to the whiteboard and just start writing out what I'm trying to do. Even when like I could just stare at the code, but just getting away from the code itself like helps so much. So that's even like a strategy I would want to employ going forward. Is like, hey, can I just write down what I'm trying to do here on a notebook instead of typing it out?
paper?
I know. So I'm surprised it works surprisingly well.
Paper.
And most of the time, it's just like writing pseudocode of like, all right, I'm gonna write this function, it's gonna do this logic, boom, 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 and then go back to the code, problem solved.
Can I ask a selfish question?
Yes, one more burning question, and then we'll get to the networking and music side.
I think I might be the only junior here who has not had a job in the tech field yet, I think.
I think there's a few people looking here.
Looking for first jobs?
Possibly.
Oh, awesome.
Yes.
Yeah. What is, in your experience, when you were a junior, or if you are a junior, or if you've seen juniors, what are some of the things, what are some of the criteria for like, what are some of the criteria that a successful junior will have?
I have one criteria. We have 2 interns right now. We screened over 1,000 applicants for our junior position.
Damn.
I had a tweet that went viral, and like it was ridiculous. It was the worst thing ever. Because you have 1,500 applicants, you're like, what do I do now?
You're like, I need some HR software right now.
But it comes down to how well do you learn and how quick do you learn. So a company hires a junior engineer, they're taking a risk, and they need to know that you're going to add value consistently to the company. They're going to think. It can't be like years. You can't get into like a pace with like just being a junior. It happens, right? Like you just sit in your little hole and enjoy your little code, and eventually move on to another job. It's how well do you learn, how quick do you learn. And so like if someone like fails out of our program, like it's because they're just not learning fast enough. Like for some reason, like they just can't get into it and cannot like self-drive through that. There's a lot of things as a junior engineer you've got to research, you've got to ask questions, you've got to go to your team. And if you get caught in a place where you don't know and you just sit there and you don't engage and you don't work through it, you let that black hole persist, it like you don't grow. So I think almost all companies that do have junior programs, which unfortunately most startups don't, because the mechanisms aren't there to support it. It's all about how quickly you learn. Does your team feel like you're catching up?
In my experience, as a junior particularly, they know what you know based on your resume. Maybe you went to a prestigious boot camp, or even if you went through a 4-year degree, like they know what you know. I learned very quickly as a junior looking for a job that they're looking for good interpersonal skills, communication, if you're friendly towards other people, and if you're a culture fit. So I found to not try to blow someone away with my technical knowledge, which wasn't very much. That wasn't the way to go. Like, try to be friendly, try to show them that you're a team player and that you're a good communicator and that you fit with the culture. That's what they're really interviewing you on. At least that was my experience.
Well, on the hiring side of that's certainly true. Like in one particular case, we hired someone who was fresh out of college over somebody who had like 5 years of experience, because the 5-year of experience person thought he knew what was going on, and the person fresh out of college was going to be the person that we wanted. And that 5-year person was just fine. It was that they weren't lined up with us. So,
And also kind of like what Nick said, not trying to come in and impress people with technical knowledge, kind of like builds off of be pragmatic, but also like you don't want to be noticed in code, you want to be noticed in meetings. So like you want to be noticed for what you say. Like you don't want people to look at your code and know you wrote that code. Like if you're in an enterprise code base, like the team has an established style. You want to like be a code community, go in there, be able to like integrate with what they're doing, and kind of make it look the same so that because if it looks different, they're gonna be like, who the hell did that? And it's a get blame. And it's like, why did you do that? And if you don't have a why, then that brings it back to the pragmatic thing. It's like, well, no one wants, like Billy blogs to come in and be like, I read 900 Medium articles this weekend, and I implemented all of them in a code base. So good luck with those bugs, kind of deal. It's just like, don't be noticed in code, be noticed in meetings. Speak up in meetings and have good ideas in meetings. Or even if you get shot down all the time, and every idea you have does not make the assumptions that a senior developer would make, people are still going to be like, well, he's got the right idea, he's always coming up with these
Like,
ideas, he won't
yeah.
stop suggesting ideas, and at some point you just start suggesting ideas.
Yeah, it shows that you're always thinking about the problem and trying to come up with some sort of solution, even if it's not the right one. Like I've certainly even like talked myself out of solutions. Like oh, what if we did that? Oh no, that's not gonna work. So, so even if I'm like immediately second guessing myself, I'm always thinking through the problem. So that shows that you're always being, like you said, being pragmatic about it. So,
Yeah, and it's also just like, you know, you can read a blog article and see something cool, but it still goes back to the, don't be noticing code, we met this in a meeting, and bring it up in a meeting and say, hey guys, I saw this cool thing, I think that it would be good because of this, can we start a discussion on this, and then the whole team gets on the same page. You just want to be a team player, that's number one.
Be a team player.
Yeah. Most of the code I write in an enterprise environment, I don't.
So much of this advice is, sorry.
But go ahead.
Yeah.
I'll just, yeah, go.
So much of this advice is relevant for senior engineers too. It's like,
Absolutely.
Communicate well. Be a team player. Don't be a dick.
and it's just getting less, and it's getting, like, people are getting wise to be like smart dicks around. Like, those people move jobs, and yes, they make a lot of money. They don't make friends, and they don't get opportunities that are extended to people who build relationships and connections with their teams.
They also end up in a lot of maintenance mode situations.
Yeah, and it's just like your career opportunities dissipate if you are focusing on your intelligence and not your relationship skills.
And if you have 30 years of experience and you know you're still asking yourself why, and the answer to why am I writing like this is, well, because I've done it this way for the past 10 years, and maybe you should open up some documentation and see if there's a new way, you know?
All right, so we could continue this conversation all night, I have no doubt. It's very important, and we can continue it, but let's do it over some music and beer. Before we do that, another round of applause. Us for contributing to this awesome conversation. We're gonna get Lita in here another time. It's just not gonna be tonight. Always looking for speakers, sponsors, fresh ideas. That's what that notepad back there is for.
Sponsor will be on the stream.
The sponsor will be on the stream. You'll be seen by at least a few dozen. We're racking up the numbers lately.
The body's pretty Jev's slides going to be attached to the...
Yeah, we can.
Yeah, I can get those slides.
Jev, we'll get the slides, and of course the video is going to be on YouTube, but we'll put the slides in the meetup group if that works. We'll tweet it out too.
Yeah, that'd be amazing. I was thinking like the whole presentation would be absolutely amazing for junior engineers. Like,
Yeah,
I thought it was a really good presentation.
Awesome.
I learned something in your presentation.
Stop.
I haven't used the UseReducer thing.
Yeah, it's pretty badass.
I was like, oh man, because I went research.
That's cool.
I was like working on this code challenge, and I saw this UseState thing, and as a good developer, I clicked on the first Stack Overflow link, skipped the question,
Yeah,
went
right.
straight to the answer, and I'm like, oh, this works. And then I saw your presentation, I was like, I used hooks today, and I didn't even know. Anyways,
Black boxes.
let's continue to hang out and grab another beer. We usually hang out for another 30 minutes or so. So continue these conversations. There's a lot of smart senior. It doesn't matter who or what you are. We all have something to learn from each other. But thank you all for being here. This is super fun, and we'll be back on December.
There you go.
Whatever
That's
the
next month.
whatever the first Wednesday of December is, we're gonna be here. So
And thank you, Nick.
Thanks, Nick.
thank you. Stop. All right. And scene.